Hi, I'm Kieren,
And I'm Riku.
and welcome to Artificially Ever After.
Short stuff. So, what are we talking about today, Kieran?
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about some news that just happened the other day, which was that an AI lab, specifically a company called Anthropic, which you may have heard of, they make their chatbots called Claude, they deliberately made its own flagship model worse, so like their frontier, top-performing model, and they didn't tell anyone about it initially, which is the scary part. So what happened was on the 9th of June, Anthropic released Claude Fable 5, interesting name, which is their latest model, the public version of its most powerful model. But outside of the launch blog and all the press releases, so not very easy to find, but buried within this thing called a system card, which is just this PDF document about all the technical details of this new model, there was this safeguard that they put in, which secretly degraded the model on requests about frontier AI model development. So this is all things to do with building these LLM models and these chatbots, and there was no refusal, no kind of notice that it would do that. It would just give you a worse response. And this is crucially different to what we've seen before. So there have been safeguards in these models previously, but unlike some of the ones around like building bioweapons or cybersecurity safeguards, which visibly tell you you're not allowed to talk to the chatbot about these topics, and it can't tell you, sorry, you can talk to it about it, but it can't give you a response about those topics. These requests stayed invisible initially, and Anthropic was saying that this would actually only affect 0.03% of traffic and fewer than 0.1% of companies that they work with. So basically, they were trying to do this to target other big frontier AI labs who were also building models so that they weren't able to build them using Claude, which was already against their terms of service and use, but they now did this sort of secretly in the background. However, in their defense, so within about 48 hours, because they got a lot of backlash on this, that like that's so misleading, like you can't be just doing that in the background, Anthropic did then revise this kind of invisible part where you weren't told that the prompt had been made worse, and they apologized and said that they made the wrong trade-off on this, and now these specific requests about AI development that were getting worse, they were flagged, and they were visibly told the user if the model would kind of switch to a different model in order to answer their request. And if we just step back for a moment here and think a bit more generally, like this is quite a concerning concept that is happening here. So these companies now, these big AI labs, essentially feel very comfortable with kind of controlling the intelligence of their models, their chatbots in different areas, so making it sort of less smart when it responds to you about a certain topic. And previously, this has always been done from a safety perspective on kind of topics that I think everyone could probably agree you shouldn't be able to go and ask a chatbot about, such as how do you make a bomb? However, now the topic that's being throttled is about AI model development. And this, you could quite clearly see, could give Anthropic a sort of competitive advantage over other companies like OpenAI, because they still have access to the base model that's super intelligent. It's just the public-facing model that is getting less smart at asking about AI development.
And just to check, so in terms of censoring, like using Claude's model for like developing other frontier models, like, do you think that Anthropic are just doing this for a competitive edge?
So I think it's quite obvious that they would benefit from that in a competitive way. So, I don't think we should rule that out as a reason. However, they themselves gave a different explanation and reason as to why they've done this, which is also one I think we should give credit to, and it's something we're going to talk about in this episode today, which is this concept of something called recursive self-improvement, which is a very genuine safety concern, and one that previously, which we've talked about on the podcast before, we've only ever mentioned it as a kind of hypothetical scenario that is the thing of sort of science fiction movies. However, now with what Anthropic are saying, and I think also looking at the progress of Anthropic as a company in the past sort of 6 months, is becoming a very real thing. So Riku, do you want to just now demystify and tell us a little bit about what recursive self-improvement actually is?
Okay, let's condense like a very big topic into a short stuff episode. And yeah, I think we've been meaning to talk about recursive self-improvement for a long time.
Yeah, we are going to do a long form on this as well, though. So this is just a brief overview.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, just to put the idea in one sentence, and maybe even as the name suggests, it's basically when an AI system it becomes like smart enough to be able to improve itself. And this looks like being able to design and train its own successor. So you could imagine like this brain maybe that is able to like look at its own brain and kind of fix bits and bobs and make itself smart in a very general way. But this actual imagery might be the scariest one, but actually that's not how this looks like today. And what we're seeing today is much more kind of simple in a way.
Yeah, it's more subtle, isn't it?
Yeah, more subtle, but just
but still very effective. Yeah.
Yeah, so what's happening today is clearly not science fiction, and Anthropic themselves used their Claude models to write more than 80% of the code in their code base. So they are themselves like already literally using Claude to improve Claude.
Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So why is recursive self-improvement so important to AI safety? And as we've touched on many times before in this podcast, like intelligence is clearly something that we should be very careful with, because obviously it can be very beneficial, but also be very harmful. And if we're able to track how intelligent something is over time, that's kind of like, predicting, how these capabilities will change. And recursive self-improvement is like fundamental to that curve. So if the AI model is capable of improving itself, then the AI model itself is actually dictating how quickly it's improving. And then it can very easily no longer be in human hands. Like you can imagine that it's improving so much faster than any human would like be able to understand. And I think that's like the kind of doomsday scaremongering that kind of can easily come out of this RSI phenomena.
Yeah, and the reason why people call this an exponential improvement is because if the AI is getting smarter each time, and that new AI that is smarter is the one that's improving itself, that rate of improvement is increasing. So like each time it improves, it's sort of it's quicker and much bigger jump in intelligence. And it's kind of an accelerating rate of improvement, which is what would be very difficult for humans to stay in control of.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And this, I think we're going to have to do a long form, because there are many open questions, because like, is it going to be exponential or is it going to be much slower? And we call these like rates of like self-improvement, these takeoff speeds, but we'll have to go into that another time in more detail. But yeah, just to kind of pull this back into reality a bit more, like as we just mentioned, like this is like a very heavily contested topic in the AI space, and like Anthropic themselves are like very uncertain with how severe this risk is, but that uncertainty is like kind of covering all possible outcomes, because we really don't know like what this takeoff speed might be. So it's a very real and seriously debated concern. And yeah, like rather than thinking of it as like this sci-fi, like there's a genuine chance that this can happen. So it's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah. And I think that's why we're talking about it today, right? Is because this was the exact motivation and reasoning that Anthropic gave for why they were making their models less smart on these AI development topics. And just to quickly explain very briefly how they were doing that. So they had sort of three main ways that they would make the model respond to you differently if you were asking it about how to build a smarter AI. One was that they would modify your prompt, so like the question you asked the model, without you ever seeing it, but before the model ever saw that question, they would actually change your prompt. And then the two others were more technical ways in which they did that, which essentially made the region of the artificial neural network, so the chatbot's brain, they actually made that less performant on those certain topics. And this is something called fine-tuning. And they're able to do that just on the certain regions of the brain which know all the stuff around AI model development. Cool. So just to wrap up then, I think it's good to look at what lessons we can take from this and how it can change what you do when you use these chatbots. And I think the main thing is now knowing that these companies behind the scenes are very capable and have started to kind of change the intelligence of these models in different areas. And while this specific topic of making frontier AI models might not affect you, it might not be what you're going to ask sort of ChatGPT and the like,
I hope not.
The notion is still there that things can be controlled behind the scenes, and I think this can change how we go about using these models. I think the first of which is the fact that there are loads of models out there now. We've said this before, and you could go to different ones of these kind of frontier AI models, so ChatGPT and Claude, and you could try and find a sort of consensus among them. So knowing that you shouldn't just rely on a single model from a single company is quite empowering now.
Yeah, one more thing you can do now is like a lot of these companies do actually release like a system card. So basically like a lot of very like rigorous information about the model they release. And one little hack that you could probably do is just take that PDF, that 350 page one about Fable 5, and just give it to a language model and ask it to kind of tell you the important bits. I would say though, just like obviously actually read the PDF, because you never know if like the summary is actually accurate, right? And one more thing as well, which maybe this one's a bit more technical, but there are really nice bits of software out today that are very accessible. So one of them is actually have your own open weight backup that you can run on your local machine, like on your laptop. And if you look up something called Ollama, there's a really nice open source kind of bit of software that isn't too hard to set up. And nowadays, open source models are small enough to run on your like an average computer, like
on your laptop.
Yeah, on your laptop, and they're still pretty capable. So you can always have that as a backup. That's like, not only
no one's controlling that.
Yeah, exactly. No one's controlling it, and we actually have a whole short sub episode on how can we trust AI, the case for open source. So check that episode out if you want to see and listen to lots of different kind of reasons why it's a good idea to have an open source model on your local laptop.
Cool. So just to close then, so I guess like the main takeaways from this is that slowing down AI progress in this way makes us realize that this recursive self-improvement topic is becoming very real, and the intentions that Anthropic had in doing this might be very wise if that is the case, and it could be a very genuine safety concern. But the way in which that was done is the part that we need to be kind of thinking about, that, if there's this break on the model and trying to slow things down in that way that you can see very visibly, and it tells you that's the case, that's a genuine safety feature. But if you can't see that break is being put on and the intelligence is being dumbed down without your knowledge, and it just gives you a response that you don't know is different, that is very clearly sort of manipulation and something we need to be scared of. But the good news is, in this case, is that this time people realized what was going on and kind of realized within 48 hours, and it was changed very quickly. But this is why it's so important to keep kind of plugged into these topics and be AI literate around these chatbots and how best to use them, because otherwise we now know that it's quite easy that we could kind of get manipulated by these companies. So we hope that covers it. But yeah, stay tuned for a longer form episode, more on this topic of recursive self-improvement now that it's becoming very real and very important.
So we hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please get in touch at contact@artificiallyeverafter.com. And we also have a Patreon if you're willing to support us with some extra content. So thank you all for listening, and we'll
catch you next time.